Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
So, welcome to the third episode of the Wordy Pair Podcast. I am Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we are going to be starting out talking today about prompts and writing for prompts. So this has been something that we've both been using recently. And there are lots of good places to find prompts on the internet. And they're very good for kind of getting you started and getting a little bit of... They can be good for getting a little bit of traffic headed your way, too. So we figured
you can do yourself a nice Ask Jeeves internet search for writing prompts, and you should come up with virtually nothing, because I don't think Ask Jeeves is around anymore. But you could definitely use Google for that.
Yes, Google,
and you'll find stuff.
I mean, realistically, you're going to want to look for publishers of short fiction. Usually, like free publishers of short fiction. You're going to want to look for writing forums where people will generally have contests or stuff like that from the forum, and you'll get a prompt each month, and everybody writes the prompt.
And if you really want to work at it intensely, writing forums tend to have multiple prompts daily in various categories.
A good point, too. And then you can even, if you're lucky, find some people on... like, if you look at, like, writing communities on social media, you can find people who are creating prompts there. So, I mean, they're fairly easy to find, and they're fairly straightforward to write for, or at least on the surface, they're straightforward to write for. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the adventures in prompt writing that we've had.
I mean, I haven't had too many adventures, I would say, but it's one of them things where it's like you can use it and do it for multiple reasons, one of them being just for fun. You can use it as a way to create a backlog of things that you can put together in a collection if you maybe want to publish it as a book later, or use it on some kind of portfolio where you can, show it to prospective publishers. You can do flash fiction. Nothing wrong with flash fiction. I know it gets a bad rap sometimes, but one of the nice things about flash fiction is that if you're really, really bad at editing and you want a way to practice, write a bunch of flash fiction and then go back and edit each one down to something that is, reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, you can you can always... I mean, flash fiction is highly in demand because a lot of people, or a lot of places, will just throw it up on like a website for effectively free.
And it's really easy to get people to publish flash fiction. It's, you talk short stories and, you're kind of like competing with a lot of other people, especially with online magazines. Flash fiction, they tend to take like 10 or 20 of them at a time, depending on who's putting them out there.
Well, there are some places that'll just take them and there's not really much of a barrier. So even if you're really, really, really green, you can still use these places as like places to kind of get your start.
Yeah, but it's important to note that like there's certain places where you'll get a lot more eyeballs than just... A lot of places that will put up anything you send them, but they're not necessarily getting people looking at everything. And you also have the issue of, the places that will put up every single piece of flash fiction they receive. That means there's a lot up there that people are sifting through and trying to find something to read. And you might just be getting glossed over by sheer volume. So if there's a place that will accept like 10 a month, and you can get one of yours in there, chances are if they have a high readership, you're more likely to get someone seeing it.
Yeah. So my first experience with prompts was actually on social media. There was a guy on Minds who put some prompts up on like he made little YouTube videos where he outlined the prompts, and it was kind of just like a for fun once a month prompt. And yeah, it was a good way to kind of get started. It was one of those things where everybody kind of share alike their stories, and I got a couple of months of that. Recently, I've been writing occasionally for the Iron Age Media prompts, which are kind of neat. It's instead of like a verbal prompt and like a word prompt, they just publish an image once a week, and you can write either flash fiction or a short story for it with the barrier between them at what 1,000 words, I think.
Yeah. The flash fiction is up to 1,000, and after that,
Yeah.
it's a short story.
Right.
I did not
So
see
those
an
have been
upper
fun.
limit on word count for short stories, though. I'm assuming it would be somewhere around 5 to 10.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is that they will link. So what happens is that they don't publish your story directly; they publish a link to your story, and so you're hosting it yourself, and so it's up to people to determine whether they want to read it, however long it is.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. That's an interesting thing that they do is they have their website. They make the prompts. They link to the ones that they put up on their site, but the link goes to your personal site. So if you have a website or a Substack or a blog, something like that, that's what it gets linked to. So you actually will get people viewing your content, not just your content posted somewhere on someone else's website.
Right. So if you have your website set up where, for instance, if you have your website set up so that there's a taskbar at the top of the website with like, here's all my other short stories or here's all my other flash fiction, you can sometimes get clicks on those and people will kind of wander around a little bit, which is nice.
Yeah, I don't actually remember what my first writing prompt experiences were, but I know a long period went by where I wasn't doing any of them. And a lot
Yeah.
of them I never put anywhere where they could actually be seen by anyone. But I did do
Well,
the
so
same.
that's something to think about actually, because even if you so the one thing that people worry about, I think sometimes, is that what they're writing isn't good enough or something like that. So if you have that issue, you can write for the prompt just for practice, and then just keep it in your back pocket. You don't have to necessarily send it in. I realize that's an obvious thing to say, but that's another advantage to writing for prompts, is that you kind of get the first chunk seed of the story for free, and then you can decide whether or not what you come up with is worth putting out there.
Yeah, and there's no real problem with pointing out the obvious. I mean, the name is Wordy Pair. We
Yeah,
probably are excessively wordy at some times,
indeed.
except for
So
right
let's
there.
see. Well, yes, of course. I mean, wordiness is kind of a macro phenomenon anyway. So
So there's like you said, like that one that you mentioned that you started with, that I had done that one as well around the same time that you were doing it. And there's lots of people that like to do things like that it can kind of give you an idea of how other people are looking at what you write too. So like someone actually did a voice recording of a couple of my stories, and I remember one of them, I write in a sort of visual sense where like you kind of have to be looking at the page for some of my jokes or some of my dialogue to make sense. It won't make sense if someone just reads it to you. So a lot of my stuff is really hard to transition to audiobook. So one of the things that happened was I had 4 quotations at the beginning of something. And I always use quotations to separate one person was talking and then another person was talking and then another person, it switched after that. But I gave no indication of who was speaking. So this scene that was supposed to be 2 people calling back orders for cooking at a restaurant, the person who read it interpreted it as the one person that was working in the kitchen singing the orders to themselves, and I thought that was interesting.
nice.
And that's actually there's some tools out there now, like you can find several different again, they're calling them AI text to speech programs,
Yes.
but really they're just AI is an overused term at this point, but it's in the mainstream, so we'll just go with that. So AI text-to-speech programs that you can save your writing as a PDF file, and you can upload it to these programs, and they will read it in semi-robotic voices. Some of them are, the voices have gotten way better in the past 15 years.
Oh, yeah.
We've come a long way from Vocaloid, which Vocaloid is still pretty cool, but I was listening to one of mine in like a very, very good, British accent reading.
Uh-huh.
And there were parts of it where, especially in my case, I use weird names in a lot of things. Sometimes it just didn't come out right, but you can upload stuff and listen through those programs, and you can see spots in your stories where it's like, oh, that doesn't transition to an audiobook very well, or you would have to word it just right, or do just the right pause at the right time in order for this to come out clearly.
Yeah, and then, there are other problems with, like, I think we talked about this a little bit last time, but
yeah,
there's,
like,
issues with names coming out a little funny, too.
But I mean, if you're going to do an audiobook, you want to actually have a real person record it, because there's no text-to-speech program that exists today, unless you've got a 1 to 5 paragraph thing that doesn't have any space for a mess up.
Well, some of the more specialized ones have actually gotten quite good. Like, I sent you that video a couple weeks ago with someone took the voice of the bad guy from Morrowind and made like a long string of insults for a character or something like that. And so there are some of these AI things that actually do a pretty good job of doing, like inflection and stuff like that. So
yeah,
it's just expensive.
There's I mean, the ones that I'm thinking of aren't particularly expensive, and they can do about that good of a job. But you have to, when you're dealing with those kinds of programs, you have to position everything properly. Like, I noticed that you can't have a visual stutter in someone's dialogue, and these programs don't know what to do when they encounter it. Like, if you have one of those things where it's supposed to be someone going like that's like a Porky Pig thing, it'll actually read it as tss, and it will have no pause between the th sound.
Again, it depends on which one you're using. But
well, you can set it up so that it will read that properly, but there's so many different things that if there's
a little bit of technical aspect to it.
Yeah, there's a very, very it's actually a very technical when it comes to anything that's hyphenated or anything that is dialogue without like a comma reference for who is actually speaking.
Sure.
There's a tendency for it to just run two dialogue sections together.
Yeah, I mean, you would. I mean, if you're gonna use one of these things to have your story read, you're gonna need to do some editing in order to get it to sound right.
Yeah,
some of them can do it, I guess is my point. But
it's also kind of fun just to have your own, especially if you wrote it and you know what it really says anyway. I've listened to just about everything that I've written in the past couple of years on a text-to-speech thing, and it's kind of neat.
Uh-huh. But anyway, getting back to prompts, another thing that's cool about prompts is feedback, because a lot of the prompts are structured as like a contest, and there'll either be a vote or even like actual like judging that can help you figure out what people are seeing and what they're not seeing. Like, one problem that I seem to have is that I have things that people aren't getting because they're too subtle, and so I'll be like, but that's in the story, and they're like, no, it's not in the story. I'm like, but it's in the story, and it's like, no, it's not. It can be a little funny when you write something where you imply something, and you're like, oh man, I implied this thing. I didn't say it directly, but like everybody's gonna get that I implied it, and then you read the judges read statements on your stuff, and you're like, they didn't see it.
Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, that's kind of like the same thing like I was talking about with the quotation marks thing. Sometimes it's just a matter of like everyone's going to interpret it differently no matter what you do. So there's not much cause to try and be too much of a perfectionist about it. Well,
it's not about perfection, it's about like making things explicit, more explicit than you think they should be.
Yeah.
Like this wasn't a like the issue that I had was not a it's unclear who's talking. It was I implied that something was happening in 15 minutes, and everybody missed that something was happening in 15 minutes, and therefore the impact of my story was significantly reduced. Whereas if they had talked to me about it and I was like, no, but this is happening in 10 minutes, and they'd be like, oh.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So that's another good thing, is that you can get real feedback and discover where, like, you can discover that you're being too subtle, or discover that you're, like, making, brash mistakes or whatever. And the people that do this are usually pretty friendly, so, whatever you throw at them, they'll if it's got, like, spelling errors, they'll notice that, or, like, grammatical mistakes, they'll notice that, but they won't, like, yell at you. They'll be like, this has a lot of errors in it, or this has errors here.
Yeah, that can be extremely helpful. Like, I mean,
yes.
I consider myself a pretty good speller, but when you're typing, things are going to go wrong, whether you know how to spell a word or not. And then there's a lot of times, no matter how well trained you think you are in the use of grammar, there's going to be times where you hear something in your head and you're just not paying attention to what you're typing. And even the best of authors will occasionally write a THEIR as THERE.
Yeah, or you'll just mistype something and not see it,
Yeah.
And then the one thing is that editing your own stuff is always a little bit tough, because you know what you thought you wrote, and that has you have a tendency to read it faster, therefore, and so you can overlook little errors pretty easily.
Yeah, there's definitely value in having an editor outside of yourself, and this is coming from someone who has edited all of his own stuff. I still go back, and every once in a while I find I won't say a completely cringeworthy mistake, but just one of them things where it's like, that really bothers me, but I've already published it.
Yeah, I've done the same thing.
God,
so.
I just ran across one the other day, and I can't remember what it is, but they're there. It's like sometimes you accidentally made a she a he, or you meant to say her, and you wrote she instead.
Here, yeah, she. Well, like, I had one thing recently where I finished a quote with a period where I should have finished it with a comma, and it's like, oh, I totally missed that. Why did I do that?
Yeah. And on the subject of feedback, that's another good reason to try and find writing forums, because it's not just prompts where you can get feedback. There's actually usually sections in any forum for writers where people will offer to give feedback on things that you write.
Oh, and so there's an interesting point to be made here, is that if you're going to try to write for a magazine or something like that, the magazine will generally ask to have like first publishing rights, and so these forums will often have like hidden from the public areas where you can post incomplete stories that you intend to publish as well. Usually you'll have to be a member of the forum for a little while before you can access those areas, but like they also do exist, and they allow people to look at your work without it being quote unquote published.
Yeah, that's also useful, because you definitely don't want to break contract on that. You want to let them have their first publishing rights.
Right.
With the exception of my old college magazine, which never published the story that I was supposed to get published. That's always going to stick in my craw.
What? I thought that they did publish it.
No. I won the contest.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be in the college magazine, which I guess that year they decided to stop making. And for 5 years, I kept going back saying, did they ever, print anything out for that? So it was just like an entire 10 or so people that were supposed to be in this magazine that were never in it. And it's just like, well, that sucks.
Yeah, it does. I never heard that part of the story from you. I remember that you won the contest. I just I had no idea that they never published it. I thought that part of publishing it was the fact that it was, it was the winner.
Well, I consider that one well out of contract at this point. I'm definitely going to put that one anywhere I feel like.
I mean, if they, I think that they didn't ask for a permanent. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll care.
They wouldn't even know. I don't even think they do the award anymore. It's it was in 2001, I think.
Wow.
So yeah, those are some thoughts on prompts. Do we have any more prompty type thoughts?
One thing you can try if you're feeling blocked up is that you can try to produce your own prompts, just like fling stuff at the wall and see if anything shows up. But that's more of a brainstorming thing than prompts, I guess. I don't know. I mean,
It could also be a fun exercise to do your own, prompt thing for other people.
oh yeah, sure. I mean, like the first prompt that I ever did was it was late last year, and there was a guy over on social media who was just like, here's the prompt. I want this line to be somewhere in there for bonus points, quote unquote bonus points, and I want this event to be in there for bonus points. And so I was like, okay, I'll write a short story for one of them, and then the second one I wrote like a 6,000 word thing that was like an introduction for a character that I was going to introduce in a novella, but I decided to do a short short pulp to introduce him, and that one was fun. But then the guy that was producing these prompts stopped producing them.
Yeah, he was doing a pretty good job. I just think that I think he was probably getting better views on his YouTube channel for reviewing books than for the prompts. But more power to him. He was I wrote an entire book just because he did those prompts. Yeah, that's another thing too. It could be something that sparks an entire novel for someone if you if you need something to kickstart a novel.
Yeah, or break yourself out of like a rut, so to speak.
Yes. I mean, so like in my case, it was one prompt I wrote something for, and then I had so much fun writing the first one that I was like, I'm going to do another chapter of this, and then another, and then I was like, I can do a whole story with this, and I ended up doing, I think it was just a novella. It wasn't a 60,000 word story, maybe half that much, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something that can happen. There's, maybe you're looking for something to get started with and to come up with some characters, and writing different prompts can give you an idea of what kind of characters you want to write.
Another thing is that it can be a really good way to get into a genre that you're not used to, because it gives you the starting point, and that way you don't have to worry about I need to come up with a backstory for this or that. You can just start writing in a different genre based on the prompt, and sometimes people who are more familiar with different genres will have better ideas for prompts for that genre than you would. So
always be on the lookout for that stuff.
I mean, it's one of those things that if you want to write, you need to actually write. You can't just have 1,000 unfinished novels that never get published anywhere. You really should try to get. I mean, this is not the age of you write one book and some company picks it up and then you kind of have a career with them for life. That is not common.
It's not common at all. And most of the
self-publishing is becoming a big deal, and there's very few people who are going to have long relationships with you based on some manuscript that you send them sight unseen. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no, that's fine. You had a better point than me anyway. I was just going to bring up a lot of. Like I remember watching Brandon Sanderson do a thing about he's teaching he's doing an extracurricular class for this group that of people that are doing creative writing, and he's like, I don't know how many of you in here actually want to pursue a career as a novelist, but I want you to understand that you may be 10 times as good a writer as I am, and you can still fail at this. This is never a guaranteed business.
Yeah.
And he spent a good 20 minutes on his lecture talking about all the things that you have to do to work with a publisher and to get those contracts. And he said there are opportunities, but not everyone's going to make it.
Yep.
And that's an important thing to remember. So no matter how many times you send in a manuscript, maybe no one's going to take it. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a good book. And, nowadays you're living in a world where if that's the case, you always can publish independently. And again, even when you do that, people may never read your book, but you can always have something out there at least. It's a step up from where things used to be.
It's one of those things too where you can kind of have a bunch of little things on some online store that, tens of thousands of people visit it every day, and every once in a while someone will pick up on it and say, "Oh, here's something I might read." So
yeah, and I mean, you might have a book that you think is really good, and everyone that reads it also says it's really good, but there's just
getting people to read it is hard as well, and a different skill.
Yeah, marketing is a way different skill from just self-publishing the book. The marketing part is actually the difficult part.
So one thing that might be worth talking about is actually experimenting with how assuming that you have something self-published. You've done this more than I have, but experimenting with different ways to promote the book or different ways to put down the short description for the book. Any thoughts there?
I do have some thoughts on that. We may have to save that for another one because I have been on and off doing that for years and I don't remember everything that I've done.
Okay.
Before we talk about that, I will say that, I might have a little more experience with that, but let's start at mainstream publishing. Now, you actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but you actually have published in peer-reviewed journals, right?
Well, yeah, but those are nonfiction scientific works.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a type of publishing. So, like, there
Yes.
is, it's important to note there's a different process in publishing something in a book form that someone else is producing for you.
Oh, sure.
Or in a magazine or a journal versus self-publishing. I have exclusively done self-publishing with the exception of any contests I've won where stuff was in a magazine or something.
Right.
Or
not in a magazine.
Yeah, or not in a magazine. So back in, I think it was the early it was after the 90s. It was the early 2000s. Okay. You used to be able to go into bookstores and there would be writer's market guides that you could purchase back when the internet didn't really supply all of this information. Yeah. And it's kind of funny to think that it was only 2 decades ago that you couldn't get this information online easily. And so there were these books that just had addresses that you could send manuscripts to publishers. Like you would buy a book that had 400 pages of just addresses, and it's like this publisher and this publisher and this agent, and you would use that information, and I would go through them and see what these books would usually explain, like what they take, yes. what they're looking for, and they would be updated every year. Now I don't know if they still publish it anywhere in paper format. There's probably a writer's market thing online somewhere. I don't.
So I recently found a PDF of one of these, and it looks like it's a book that was just made into a PDF, or vice versa.
Yeah, that's probably what it is. I got out of the idea that I wanted to publish mainstream probably around 2005, but up until that point I was buying those books and I was looking through them and saying, I might publish with this person, or I might publish with that person, I might try to send this to this place, and you have to understand the process for that. You can, if you're lucky enough to be selected as someone who they want to invest in and do some marketing for, which it's also important to understand that a lot of times, even though publishers will do some of the marketing for you, you still have to do a lot of it on your own. And they actually, they will expect you to do that. They're going to want you to do book signings. They're going to want you to have some kind of online presence on social media where you can, talk about your book. And of course, when you do that kind of thing, you have to make sure that, if you're going to also use social media to be a crank about anything, have a separate account. Just, if you're going to promote books on your Twitter or something, use the Twitter to promote your books. Use it to talk about your books. Use it to talk about, the things that, you're doing with your writing. And maybe occasionally put up a picture of a cake you ate if you really want to. I don't know. But I would say that from a marketing perspective, never bother using a social media account for more than what it is you want to market. If you're using social media just for fun, use it for fun. You can still, semi-promote your stuff there and talk about your stuff. But like in my case, I have a social media account and I pretty much use it for fun. So I occasionally drop a link to one of my books or something. It's not where I market any of my stuff. I would definitely create a separate account if I wanted to just have a marketing account. That's important. But
yeah, well, like there's a lot. There's probably a few opposing opinions on this, where it depends on whether or not you're writing to the same audience that you're being a crank to.
There is that. Like, I mean, if you're writing, like left or right wing nonfiction.
Yeah, like a political thriller or something like that.
You're probably going to endear yourself to your audience in that sense, but.
Yeah.
Or if you're a programmer and you're writing a programming book, but that usually applies more to nonfiction than fiction.
Well, I don't know. I see a lot of fiction authors who, after they kind of, get get some kind of a following actually kind of open up a little bit more over time. So
Yeah,
it
but
does happen.
that is after you get a following, though.
Sure.
And, if you're looking at it from the independent angle, you kind of want to use the social media to build the following and then do the book marketing. So it's
Right.
like the complete reverse from the way you would want to do it if you had someone publishing your work for you.
Right.
Because you have a relationship with the publisher at that point. You also want to make sure that you're not doing anything to damage them. You want it to be
Yes.
a symbiotic relationship. You don't want it to be a relationship where they're like, well, should we not publish any more by this person because they're kind of making people look at us and say, and and you also want to make sure that you're publishing with someone who isn't going to throw you to the curb just because you believe something that a bunch of 5-year-olds on Twitter don't believe or hate you for.
Right.
So there's two ways that you have to go about that. You want a good publisher that you have a good relationship with. If you're in a relationship with a publisher who will drop you because you didn't use the right terminology that was perfectly acceptable the year before in your newest novel, then
Right.
you're probably better off without that publisher as far as I'm concerned. I mean, maybe some people like to conform for the paycheck, but you're only hurting your writing when you do that.
Well, it's a different body of publishers for people who do that versus people who don't.
Yeah. It's just a you definitely want to case out who you're trying to publish through as well. You don't want to. I mean, some people are happy with just finding whoever will publish them and. Hey, I'll do whatever the publisher asks me to do, and I won't put up much of a fight. But I've tended to see that most people that write creatively want to be able to actually express their creativity in their writing.
Yeah.
So it's not like a hard rule. I mean, if you really just want to be someone who writes for a living and you're not too concerned with having to conform to everything a publisher wants, go for it. There's no real big problem with that. I just assume that most people don't want that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, there's definitely a balancing act that goes on anytime that you're going to be interacting with a large... Because, I mean, unless you're the next... What's her name? The
Rowling?
next Harry Potter. Yeah, unless you're the next Harry Potter, the next Rowling, and even if you are, your publisher might get stuck into a different, area or there's all kinds of weird things that can happen. And, there's people who have been canceled and vanished. There are people who've been canceled and leveraged it into, like, more eyes on the page. And, like, it's a very complicated situation for anybody who wants to do more than just promote their book and write their books.
Yeah, and it's actually, you have the option now if you aren't satisfied with a publisher, depending on how your contract is worked out. Like if they have a contract with you where you have to write 6 books for them, you got to write the 6 books. But,
right.
Once you've fulfilled obligations in the contract, especially if you made a name for yourself, independent publishing is an easy route to jump into from there. I mean, it's harder to do mainstream publishing. So if you do that and you do it successfully, you are well equipped to jump into the independent publishing arena.
Mainstream publishing is more selective.
Yeah.
Is probably a better way to put that. Because even good stuff gets thrown out by mainstream, but any person who wants to self-publish can publish whatever they want. So
yeah, and it's actually going back to the prompts that we were talking about. How if you publish a piece of flash fiction somewhere that just takes everything, naturally you're going to get 5,000 people are looking at everything, and your chances are that you're not getting glossed over really low. You're probably getting glossed over by people just it's like, oh, look at this, I'll look at this. Nobody's really focusing on anything. The same is true in the independent publishing world. You have to tackle your own marketing at that point. You don't have a publisher that's going to add anything to that. And you have to remember, even though you do want to do marketing for yourself when you have a publisher, the publisher has a vested interest in anyone they select to publish their work. So they want you to sell a lot of books. They want to get money out of what they've invested in. Usually when you take a contract with a publisher, you sell them a manuscript. A lot of times, especially if you've got a reputation already, like if you've sold books before, they will pay you in advance. And so both you and the publisher at that point have a goal. One, you want to get more royalties so that you get paid more for that book. And the publisher...
Well, so it's worth noting that usually the first chunk of royalties pays for your advance. So your royalties turn on after they've paid for your advance. So watch out for that. But yeah.
Well, that's the point I'm making. The publisher wants to make back the advance they made you, and they want to make a profit. So if you sell just enough books to where you've only made say that $5,000 advance back, you don't get any more money, they don't profit, and they spent a lot of time. So it's in both your interest to market that book in any way that you can that will, make you a profit. You want to make $20,000 off the book, and you get, and then your publisher makes $60,000 off of it. They get a profit, you get a profit, everyone's happy. And then it's like then when you write your next book, they say, okay, this person made us money, and it looks like they do a good job helping us out getting that book sold.
Yep.
Let's publish their next book. It's always good to have that kind of relationship with anyone who's publishing your work. Now, if you're independent, all those costs are falling onto you, and that means you have to research, where do I market? Who do I market to? What is the audience? A lot of times you don't have to know your audience if you're working with a publisher. They will know the audience for your book better than you do.
Yeah.
And learning your audience can be tricky, depending on what you write. I mean, obviously, if you're writing, just a standard horror novel, you're appealing to one certain crowd. If you're writing Star Wars or Star Trek style science fiction, two different types of science fiction, you're going to have one or the other audience. But sometimes it's not that straightforward. Sometimes someone is writing a crossover of genres, space operas, fantasy, horror, different things that are going to appeal to different groups. And usually you're looking at a smaller audience when you do that.
Yeah.
So you kind of want to look at what other authors that have written similar things, look at who they are marketing to. You want to... Unfortunately, we're kind of in a state of the world where you have to look at what computer algorithms are doing if you want to understand how to sell your stuff, which is it's not the hardest thing in the world, but it's definitely time consuming to keep up with it.
Yes, definitely.
You want to learn things like search engine optimization. If nothing else, you don't have to be a master of it. You just have to be aware of it existing. And
you have to be decent at it, because if you're not, then you end up on page 2 and no one sees your stuff.
Well, the reason you want to at least understand what it is and how it works is so if you really want to, you can hire someone else who's good at it, because that's always an option.
Yeah.
But it's definitely worth noting that while you can easily and for pennies on the dollar, if not for free, publish anything you want, you still are going to have to make an investment to make money off of it. There's not too many people that just write a novel and put it up on Amazon and suddenly the checks start rolling in. A lot of times people spend 2 years before they so when you publish with when you have a publisher, a lot of times your book isn't going to be published for 6 months,
a year or so.
Yeah, something like that. When you're publishing for yourself, you can publish right away and then worry about the marketing later. There's no problem with that. It seems like people are more successful when they spend a year, or maybe even 2 years, sometimes while they're still writing the novel, but they'll spend a year hyping it up and getting their marketing ready so that on day one of its release, they've got people taking pre-orders. They've got people that have been interested in what's going to happen in it for a while. You've given maybe a synopsis of the idea of the story. You've shown off your cover several times. Maybe you've changed the cover a few times. You've gone on shows or something, someone's podcast where you talk about your book. It's a significant time investment to do it right. And I will freely admit that I have never been very interested in investing that much time into it, which is why I don't really sell a lot of books.
Yeah.
But
neither of us does.
yeah. That's an important thing to do. But I understand how it works because I spent a very long time in my youth, learning about how to get things published. Because at the time, I didn't imagine that we would be living in a world that you could just throw things out online and people could see them.
Yeah.
We predate the internet.
we do indeed. We are the oldsters.
Yeah. So those are some small thoughts on publishing. I mean, I can go on about that, or do we want to switch up to something else or segue into something?
I don't know. I think this is a pretty solid discussion about publishing. Is there anything else that we missed?
There is an absolute ton that we missed. If you want to,
is there anything that we actually have knowledge of that we missed?
Well, sure. There's lots of venues for advertising, and sure. There's a lot of things you should understand before investing too much money in it. Like, for instance, Amazon. If you have a book published on Amazon, they have resources where you can use the Amazon site itself to promote your book. You pay them a fee.
Yes.
They will put your advertisement in front of so many views, or you can buy ad space on people's Kindles. When people first open their Kindles, as long as they're online, they're usually getting their opening screen as an ad for a book, and it will cycle through. People will be advertising their books. It's kind of like it's like a bidding thing. The people that paid the most are their book is going to show up more often, but everyone can do it. It's not super expensive. It can be for some people depending on where you live in the world, but
sure.
I've had occasionally I've thrown like maybe $150 to $500 to advertise, and you have to understand that it can be a money losing prospect if you don't fine tune how you market. So it can actually be beneficial. Instead of spending, say, $200 to advertise on Amazon, paying someone $250 to set that advertisement up for you.
So the other thing that I've heard is that rather than, I'm just throwing out random figures here, but rather than spending $200 on Amazon, you might start by spending $30 on Amazon and then tweak your ad, spend another $30. Tweak your ad again, spend another $30, and you can gather data that way too. So for the same $200, you can run 7 different ads, and one of them might take off. Where I don't have a good notion of how to predict what kind of an ad will take off necessarily, but some of them do.
Oh, there's a lot of people that use. There is software online where people have kind of gamed the system, where it's like, what are the search terms for certain genres of books that people are actually looking for, and you can purchase those services. I think I know exactly where you got that information from too, by the way.
Yes.
But that is and that is something that changes a lot too, because I think that information is something like 7 years old now. But there's still some of that around.
I've heard it repeated.
Yeah.
Several times in the interim. So,
but you have to remember that it changes constantly. So the thing that you were doing 7 years ago might still work, but it's there might be a tweak to it here and there, so you have to watch out for that.
The ad that works might change, but the strategy of getting in little bit by bit is usually. So from what I understand, a lot of the algorithms for these ads don't like it if you suddenly change your funding by a large amount, and so if you start out at 20 and then suddenly go to 2,000, they freak out.
Yeah,
not people freak out, but the algorithm freaks out for some reason, and then so you go from 20 to 30 to 50 to rather than 20 to 100, 20 to 200 kind of thing.
Oh, and since you bring it up, it's also important to work out a marketing budget for yourself. Work out how much you think you're going to be able to spend on marketing. And once you have an amount that you're comfortable with, that's when you should start looking at what kind of marketing you can do, what services you can do. I'm just going to go ahead and suggest from personal experience, don't bother with Facebook ads at all. I have never heard any real success stories on returns from that. I mean, maybe there are some, but I've only ever heard negative.
For other things?
For books specifically. Okay. I don't know about other things, but I've talked to lots
I mean,
of people.
the same place that I heard that you should go in small amounts and then gradually increase is the same place that said that they get most of their income from Facebook ads.
And if it's the same place I'm thinking of, I think a couple years later he changed his tune.
No, he's still saying he uses a lot of Facebook ads.
All right, fair enough. But he, of course, that's nonfiction we're talking about.
True, very true.
So I don't know how it relates. Maybe I just never met anyone that did have the success on it. So I mean,
That's fair.
I don't really meet that many people.
I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that I've heard something different in certain circumstances, and since neither of us has spent huge quantities of cash on these ads, it might just be that we optimize them poorly or something like that.
It could be. Well, okay, so I'll say this much then. As far as all of the advertising platforms I have ever used, the only one that I've heard horror stories from is Facebook.
Uh-huh.
So I'm going to retract it.
That's fair.
I'm going to retract that, and I'm going to say
what kind of horror stories?
Lots of people,
no names, but
people losing lots of money because of how the clicks worked and how things weren't explained up front and how they did their own investigations into how their advertisements were showing up, and they were like, this isn't even the audience that I selected.
Wow, really?
Yeah, lots of times. And I thought maybe it was just people being cranky, so I did look into other services that I was using at the time. And I did not hear people having these problems with... I mean, there were still problems with the other ones, but Amazon or Twitter or... Twitter actually does have a business advertising thing you can do. I haven't used them since they became X, but...
They're still
there, yeah. Well, I mean, since Elon Musk bought it, I haven't done any advertising there, but they do still have that as an option as far as I know.
Yes.
But yeah, so don't completely discount Facebook on my word. Like investigate it yourself. See if it'll work for you. Talk to people who have made more money than I did on it. You'll get a much better view of it from them.
Possibly.
I also, to be really honest about it, I'm not even on Facebook anymore. Like my account is still there. I haven't used it in 6 years. So for all I know, it could be the best platform for advertising books that exists right now.
Every once in a while, someone throws me a message and I'll go on Facebook, but that's basically it.
I might actually, now that you've said that, I might actually go back and start a new account just like one of my book accounts. Because I used to sell my books through Facebook. You used to be able to set up a little online store. I don't know what it's like now. I know that tons of stuff has changed.
Sure.
But yeah, there's... Figure out your budget and try to see where you can spend most effectively. Look into what other people have done. Try to figure out if you want to do it yourself or if you want to pay someone to figure out what your advertising strategy is going to be.
Well, so if you're doing it yourself and you don't know that much about it, I would say step one is to diversify. Try a bunch of things a little bit and see what get yourself some data before you throw in your the lion's share of your funding.
And when you have your budget, I would not recommend taking big risks with your whole budget. You want that budget to be able to continuously seed the product that you're trying to sell.
Well, so the measure of a working ad is that your revenue from the ad is more than you spent on the ad. Right?
Yeah, so figure out how long do you...
And you got to be careful here because that's after taxes, after fees, after the time that you spent doing it. You gotta incorporate all that stuff because it's very easy to trick yourself that you're on the edge of making a profit when you're not.
So that's actually a good point too. I would recommend to anyone that wants to pursue this line of self-marketing or whatever, learn how to run a business. Don't necessarily start a business. A lot of people do start an LLC for the books they plan to write. I would say wait until you have a modicum of success writing and selling books before doing that. You don't necessarily have to do that even when you are successful. It can be a good strategy, but it's not necessary. But definitely learn how to run a business, how a business works, and that will give you a pretty good insight into into how you might want to approach advertising for your books, because any book on business is going. I mean, get like Business for Dummies. Business for Dummies is fine if you just want to learn the basics of running a business, and you'll have a good insight into why people make some of the decisions they do.
And you'll have a good like baseline, so that if when you're talking to people that actually want to do business with you, that you know you're not getting the short end of the stick.
Yeah, that's important too. You want to understand, why is someone coming to me with this offer, and how is it benefiting them, and can it benefit me?
Is it benefiting me?
That too. Nowadays, that's very important. You have no idea how many people are out there now that are just like, it's I'm in it for me, and I don't care who I screw.
Basically, yeah.
Well, actually, anyone that gets a lot of spam bots knows exactly how many people are out there like that. Spam bots are the spam bots account for about 20% of it, maybe. I worry that you might have the 80-20 principle wrong, but sure. No, I mean, usually the iceberg that's visible is much smaller.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I mean, there's a lot I could keep going on about publishing, but we can switch it up now if you've got something else you want to discuss.
I mean, we've got a pretty solid episode here, I think. We went through 2 topics and we're at about an hour.
It's a lot of distilled information that by itself doesn't sound like something that's too hard to pick up, but in reality, like it took me 5 years probably to pick up all of this information, and that's not even including the very last part where it's like, oh, it's 2013 and I'm just now reading books on business.
Right. All right. Well, then I'd say that sounds like a pretty good episode here. We'll call this done. Episode 3, discuss thoughts on prompts and publishing.
And let's not commit to the topic for next time yet. We're not...
No, of course not.
We've got a couple of ideas, but...
Unless we have some real gold...
Well,
we will leave it
so
open-ended.
we'll at least say that like one of them is inspiration from music, which I thought about trying to weasel in at the end there, but would be more fun to just maybe start the next one off with.
We could do a whole episode with that, or whatever. We could start one off with that. Yeah, we have a few different ideas. We'll do some brainstorming, and thanks for listening. And once again, I'm Rudy
and Justin,
and we'll see you later.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.